They told her the seat wasn't hers, not with anger, just with practiced smiles and gentle insistence. They said it was for last-minute guests, but her name was still there, printed in black letters taped neatly to the back of the folding chair. Clara Dawson didn't argue. She had learned long ago that arguments rarely changed minds already made. So she stood, quietly, picked up her program, and moved. One row back, then another, then again. She watched as someone else sat where she was supposed to. She didn't flinch. She didn't frown. She just looked toward the stage, toward the boy she had raised on $37 and quiet mornings. The boy whose name was etched into the program as valedictorian. He didn't know she had been moved, and she wasn't going to let them steal that moment from him. Not today, not ever. She'd missed birthdays, skipped meals, given up her seat in more ways than one, but not this one. This seat she had earned. The folding chair had her name on it, C. Dawson, typed in small, neat letters, placed just behind the main row where the school board major donors and polished parents would sit. Clara had arrived early, not because she wanted to be seen, but because she needed time to breathe. She walked alone through the wide campus lawn, her boots tapping softly against the stone path. The canopy above was white and pristine, rented for dignity, not comfort. Around her, voices rose in waves. Perfume lingered in the air, sweet, expensive, foreign to her. She found her seat and sat with both feet flat on the ground, hands folded in her lap. A faint breeze lifted a strand of gray hair from her temple. She didn't brush it back. Her jacket was faded khaki regulation cut, worn soft at the elbows like parchment that had been folded and unfolded too many times. The kind of fabric that remembers every storm it's been through. A single patch above her chest read Dawson, barely visible unless you knew to look. Her boots were clean, though the soles had long given up fighting time. She didn't wear lipstick, didn't carry a clutch, but her spine was straight, her shoulders set like someone who had earned every right to be there. And still, it didn't take long. Mrs. Bellamy arrived 5 minutes later, wrapped in coral silk sunglasses the size of regret perched on her nose. Her entrance wasn't loud, but it demanded acknowledgement. She walked like the ground had been ironed for her heels. Her husband followed 2 steps behind, holding a monogrammed seat cushion and a matching hand fan. Her gaze swept the row, then stopped. On Clara. A pause, a sniff, a whisper not quite subtle. I thought we were keeping the photo section clear of clutter. The word wasn't shouted, but it echoed. Clara didn't move, didn't turn her head, just rested her thumb against the folded program in her lap. A staff member passed a note to the principal. His eyes flicked toward the rows. A slight nod, then movement quiet and polite. "Ma'am, we may need to make space for some last-minute arrangements," the usher said with a practiced smile. Clara looked up. "This is my seat." Her voice was calm, not confrontational. "Yes, ma'am," he nodded, just a temporary adjustment. "We'll make sure you still have a good view." She stood, because she'd been here before. Not on this lawn, not at this school, but in this moment. The moment where people don't need to shout to make you feel small, where exclusion dresses itself in courtesy and rejection hides behind logistics. And somehow it still hurts just as much. The kind where people don't tell you to leave, they just arrange for you to feel unwelcome. They didn't take her far, just 1 row back, then 2. A parent from the fundraising committee appeared, lanyard glinting in the sun. Then another, her hair lacquered into a helmet of blonde assurance. Each one meant a shift. A step further. By the time Clara sat again, she was in the 10th row, the very edge of the canopy. Sunlight warming her knees, dust curling at her boots. No one sat beside her. No polite nods, no borrowed fans. Her chair sat at the edge of the canopy, half in sunlight, half in shadow, like even the light wasn't sure if it should touch her. She didn't blame the light. She'd spent years learning how to stand just outside it. And yet, from that row, she could still see the stage, still see the podium where her son Luke would speak. He stood near the edge now, tall, calm, his robe pressed his tassel straight. His curls brushed back just enough to show the line of his jaw so much like his father's. He scanned the crowd briefly. Clara held her breath, hoping he wouldn't see her. Not here, not behind the banner half-torn that read, "Congratulations, Class of 2024. Let him believe she was right where she belonged. It was the last gift she could give him, an illusion of fairness in a world that rarely offered it. Bellamy had taken the original seat. She sat, prim, back-arched wrap fluffed like a trophy. A bottle of chilled water arrived in her hand. A photographer leaned in to take a candid. Clara caught the camera's flash from a distance and turned her head. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even surprised. She was tired, but steady. And far behind the crowd, beyond the balloons and the VIP tables, 6 men stood beneath the trees. Their shirts were pressed. Their shoes shined. But their posture betrayed something deeper. They didn't smile, didn't shift weight. They scanned. They waited, and they saw everything. One leaned slightly, another gave a near-invisible nod. They didn't come for the school. They came for a woman in a worn jacket whose name had once saved them, and they were already counting every move she made. His name was Marco. He worked with machines, had grease under his nails and a laugh that didn't know how to whisper. He danced in kitchens without music, and carried a battered thermos full of coffee so strong it could wake the dead. He wasn't what her parents wanted. Clara was 21, still living at home, still folding her dreams into the corners of other people's expectations. The day she met him, her car stalled outside Bailey's auto. He fixed it in 15 minutes, refused her tip, wrote his number on the back of a receipt. "In case it acts up again," he said with a crooked smile. It acted up again. She called. And just like that, something began. Not fireworks, not fairy tales, just oil-stained hands and the smell of diesel on a Tuesday morning. Their first date was ribs and bad country music. Their second was the public library, Marco helping a kid find a book in Spanish. Clara didn't know it then, but that was the moment. The moment she realized kindness could be radical and dangerous. She brought him home on a Sunday. The roast was still in the oven. Her father opened the door and froze. Her mother smiled too wide and didn't meet his eyes. They didn't say anything cruel. They didn't have to. It hung in the air like cheap perfume. Thick, artificial, unwelcome. Later came the questions. "Are you sure he's not just using you? His kind doesn't usually stay. Is this really the life you want?" She didn't answer. Not then. Instead, she married him at the courthouse 6 months later. No white dress, no guests. Just 2 signatures, a truck full of leftover carne asada, steaming in foil trays, and a fridge stocked with champagne and frozen waffles stacked like celebration confetti. There was no veil, no aisle. But there was laughter, and in that moment it was enough. That night, Clara laughed through her tears. She had chosen her life, chosen love, but she also chose distance. From her family, from polite circles, from the version of herself they thought they knew. They built a home out of weekends and quiet mornings. Marco took double shifts. Clara cleaned houses and studied for her GED after midnight. They lived paycheck to prayer, but their laughter filled the space between. When Luke was born, they had $37 in the bank, and a freezer full of hope. He had Marco's wide, wondering eyes. Clara fell in love all over again with her son, her husband, their small, stubborn life. But good things don't always last, not in their full bloom. The call came on a Tuesday. The same weekday she had met Marco. The cable on the lift had snapped. He'd crawled under a car to help a young trainee who hadn't shown up for his shift, and it crushed him. By the time Clara reached the hospital, it was already over. No lawsuit, no settlement. Insufficient evidence, they said. The garage shrugged. The town looked away. There was no funeral crowd, no casseroles. Just a folded towel soaked with grief, a crib too quiet, and the echo of Marco's laugh caught in a wrench left on the porch. She washed that towel 3 times, but it never lost the smell of goodbye. She carried Luke down the porch steps that week. No one opened their door. No one brought flowers. But someone from the post office sent a sympathy card, no return address. Another left an envelope with two $20 bills inside. She kept that envelope in a drawer for years. Not for the money, but because someone somewhere had seen her. She buried her husband alone. Then went home to raise a child in a world that had no seat left for either of them. She tried to move into better school districts, no openings. Applied for business loans, need collateral. Joined grief groups waitlisted. When Luke turned 5, the school placed him in a special class. Said it was better for adjustment. He came home asking why kids said he looked like someone from TV. She wanted to tell him the world was kind, but she'd promised him the truth. Clara didn't answer. She just held him, tighter than she ever had. That night, after he fell asleep, she opened a repair manual and started reading. Then another, and another. She learned how to change brake pads, rewire HVAC units, replace mower blades. Some nights the silence was so loud it felt like it was screaming, "Give up," but she never did. Giving up would have been easier, but she wasn't built for easy. She was built for Luke. She worked gas stations, then hardware stores, then garages. Never asked for a discount, never asked for pity, and yet, beneath the steady breath, beneath the oil-stained fingernails and cracked knuckles, something else was taking shape. Not anger, not bitterness, steel. Because this town had taken Marco and tried to erase Luke before he even began. But Clara. She wasn't here to ask for a place anymore. She was here to prove she had one. And no one, not even the ones who smiled while shifting her seat, could take that away. The world never announced when it began to shift. It didn't knock on Clara's door or write her a letter. It simply nudged a flyer left on the dashboard of a veteran's car she had just finished repairing. Civil Emergency Response. Training, state. Funded. No prior service required. She almost threw it away. She wasn't a soldier, wasn't a first responder, just a woman with calloused hands and a son to raise. But something about the folded edge, the faded print, made her pause. 2 weeks later, Clara stood at the edge of a training compound just outside Fort Logan, wearing her patched-up jacket and the same boots she'd had for years. Everyone else looked like they belonged. Retired firefighters, former medics, clean-cut, muscle-built. She was shorter, paler, older than some, younger than others, but no one looked like her. She wasn't built for the battlefield, but she'd survived quieter wars, and she didn't try to pretend. She kept her head down and studied the maps harder than anyone. Her movements were efficient, her questions few, her observations sharp. They noticed, especially when, during an urban rescue simulation, she redirected 2 search units through a hidden side alley. It wasn't even on the official blueprint. Old schematics, she said simply. Cities don't update them fast enough. The instructor blinked. A few participants smirked. But she was right. And 20 minutes later, her route saved 6 minutes in a hostage retrieval drill. The nickname came not as a joke, but as recognition. Guide. They started asking her things. Not just instructors, but other trainees. Even the embedded SEALs, 6 of them all under 30 assigned to cross-train with civilians. At first, they barely noticed her. A woman in a faded jacket didn't exactly scream, "tactical asset." But that changed. During a night drill simulating a blackout, one of them, Deacon, collapsed from heat stroke behind a loading dock. Clara was the only one who saw him fall. She didn't shout. She didn't panic. She just ran. Dragged him across gravel, pulled off his vest, and poured the last of her canteen over his chest, calling for medics with a voice that didn't waver. She reached him 23 seconds before anyone else. After that, they stopped calling her ma'am like it was a joke. One of them, Hartley, a wiry sniper with eyes like steel wire, started bringing her old satellite photos during lunch. What would you do here, he'd ask, and she'd show him. Not with bravado, just with quiet certainty. She taught them how to read wind shifts in alleyways, how to predict foot traffic by the placement of trash bins, how to feel when something was off even if the map said otherwise. They taught her, too, how to clear a stairwell, how to check corners without getting your head blown off. But she never tried to be one of them. She didn't need to. She wasn't there to wear the patch, just to earn the trust that came with it. And on the final night, as she packed her things into the back of her truck, the 6 of them approached her. No words, no ceremony. Just 6 green patches, each marked with the number 6 and the word guide, handed to her one by one. Then they walked away. Clara didn't sew it onto her jacket, not then. She folded it and placed it in the glove box, tucked between an old chrome lighter etched with initials and a sun-bleached photo of Luke at 7, missing a front tooth, holding a dandelion like it was currency. She didn't tell anyone. Not Luke, not the neighbors. It wasn't a story to be told. It was something else. She kept that patch not for recognition, but as proof to herself that someone somewhere had once trusted her to lead. Sometimes the only witness to your strength is yourself. Years passed. Luke grew. Clara kept fixing engines and holding on. And on the morning of his graduation, as she pulled her old jacket off its hanger, she paused, opened the glove box, took out the patch, and for the first time she sewed it on. Not on the outside, but inside, right above her heart. The stitches were neat. Her hands didn't shake. She stitched it with steady hands, not for recognition, but so her heart would remember someone once saw her worth. She wore it under the sun that day, seated behind rows of pearls and pastel dresses. She didn't need anyone to see it, but it was there, and so was she. The program was reaching its peak. Parents leaned forward, clutching phones. Names echoed from the speakers, each one followed by polite applause and a click of cameras. From her place in the 10th row, Clara sat unmoving. No camera, no sign, just her breath measured and steady, like she'd trained it to be. A breeze stirred the hem of her jacket. Dust curled at her boots. Somewhere behind her, a woman was laughing about a vacation house on the lake. Another talked about alumni dinners. The conversation floated over her like music from a room she was no longer invited into. Luke was near the stage now, composed, his shoulders squared, jaw set, but his eyes flicked through the crowd. She could tell he hadn't spotted her yet. She hoped he wouldn't. Not here, not in the corner they had quietly pushed her into. But then the rhythm shifted. It started small, a sound, shoes on gravel, measured, even, intentional. Then came the sight. From the western edge of the field, 6 figures began to move. They weren't part of the school. They didn't wear uniforms, no badges, no press tags, just dark suits, clean lines, silent gravity. The aisle parted for them like water. People whispered. Some looked away. Others stared openly. One man, tall with gray at his temples, carried something small in his hand. Clara recognized it before anyone else. Her breath caught just slightly, not in surprise, but in something closer to recognition. The 6 men walked in formation. They didn't rush, didn't speak, but every step was deliberate, like each was a sentence in a statement too powerful to be ignored. They reached the front of the stage and stopped. No one introduced them. No one dared interrupt. The tall man stepped forward, pulled a small square of green canvas from his pocket, held it out to the nearest usher, who took it confused. A patch, green, with a number 6, and one word embroidered across the center. Guide. The man turned, facing the crowd, and spoke. We came to honor the woman who taught us to think when fear said run, who didn't wear rank but earned command, who saved one of us in heat stroke, and saved all of us in silence. He gestured toward the 10th row, that woman right there, and for the first time in years, the woman who had held everyone else up was being held. The entire field seemed to still, and for a moment, and for the first time in years, the woman who had held everyone else up was being held. Clara didn't move. Her hands rested in her lap, but her thumb began to stroke the patch sewn inside her jacket just above her heart. She had always been the one who watched from the margins, But now the center had turned to find her, and for once she allowed herself to feel seen. She didn't cry, but her eyes glistened. She'd spent a lifetime drying tears she never let fall. Today, she let them shimmer. Luke froze on the stage. Then he stepped down. 2 steps. 3. Straight toward the men. He extended his hand and they saluted. All 6. Crisp. Unified. Without shame. The crowd didn't know whether to clap or speak, so for a while they did neither. Even Mrs. Bellamy had gone still, sunglasses lowered, mouth parted ever so slightly as if she'd miscalculated something she didn't understand. Then it started. A single clap, from somewhere in the middle rows, then another, not frantic, not forced, just rising, wave after wave, like thunder rolling across an open plain. Clara remained seated, eyes on her son, on the stage, on nothing and everything at once. What needed to be said had been said, and this time she didn't have to say it. The principal tried to regain control. His voice, usually smooth, cracked once betraying him. He stumbled through names, through the final announcements, but no one was really listening. The moment had passed, but it hadn't left. It hung in the air, heavy, real, unshakable. The 6 men didn't move again. Not until the final cap flew skyward. Then, and only then, they turned, and melted into the shade of the oak trees without a word. No interview, no press. They hadn't come for the audience. They had come for her, and the truth they carried couldn't be shaken loose. Luke stood still just a few steps below the stage. He didn't return to his place among the other graduates. Didn't glance at the principal, didn't look toward the polished rows of pastel dresses and pearl necklaces. His gaze was locked on the 10th row, on her, on Clara. She didn't move, didn't signal, only met his eyes and nodded. That was enough. Luke turned, walked back up to the stage, not in a rush, not like someone called to perform, but like a man finally stepping into the space his mother had carved open with her silence. He reached the podium, placed both hands on the wood, paused. A folded speech sat at the base of the stand, carefully written the night before. Quotes, jokes, stories about finals and late-night study sessions. He didn't touch it. The microphone crackled slightly as he leaned in. I had a speech prepared. He glanced out over the crowd. A faint breeze rustled the edges of gowns. A few parents shifted uncomfortably. It was good, I think. Had some jokes. A quote from my math teacher's cat. A few chuckles cautious. He smiled once, then let it fall. But I won't be reading it today, because what I was going to say doesn't matter as much as what needs to be said right now. He drew in a breath. My mother's name is Clara Dawson. There was no hesitation. Some of you may not know her, but you should, because every hour I studied, every award I earned, every yes I received, came after a long string of no's that she turned into fuel. He looked toward the back rows. She steadied my hand from behind the curtain. Even when her own hands were trembling from exhaustion, she never named. Not once, not twice, but for 17 years. Every yes I got was because she whispered, "You can," behind every no. The silence deepened. One teacher wiped at her eye, another looked away. Mrs. Bellamy was frozen, her manicured hands folded too tight in her lap. You talk about values here. Respect, service, excellence. But those aren't just banners you hang in a hallway. They're lived, or they're not. He glanced at the 6 men now standing quietly beneath the flag. Those men didn't show up today for a headline. They didn't come to impress you. They came because someone you tried to erase saved them. His voice didn't rise. He didn't need to shout. They remember what you forgot. That a woman with no title, no position, no invitation, led when it mattered. A hush spread through the audience thicker than applause had ever been. So, if this school wants to remember the names that matter, the ones that built foundations in silence, then it needs to remember hers. Clara Dawson. My mother, your neighbor, your classmate's silent benefactor, the woman you pushed to the back row today. He didn't need to say more. There was no crescendo, no scripted flourish, just the truth, standing still and unyielding. He stepped back from the podium, left the speech untouched, and the crowd rose. Not in confusion this time, but in clarity. Hands clapped not for performance but for presence. Clara still didn't stand, but her shoulders straightened, and in that stillness there was something greater than pride. What had been taken was returned, not in applause, but in dignity, and in the quiet healing of being seen, not in the same form, but in full weight. The principal clapped red-faced and shaken. Bellamy stared at the grass, and somewhere in the distance, beneath the canopy where sunlight met shadow, Clara reached inside her jacket, fingers brushing the edge of a patch stitched just over her heart. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Luke walked down the steps, not toward the other graduates, but toward her. He knelt beside her chair, bent low, and whispered, "We made it." She didn't cry, but her hand trembled as she reached to adjust his collar. And just like that, the ceremony continued. But the real moment, it had already passed, and it would not be forgotten. They sat together through the rest of the ceremony, Clara and Luke. Side by side in the 10th row, surrounded by people who were no longer quite sure what to say. Names continued. Awards were announced. A final blessing was offered, and caps flew into the air like paper birds longing for a different sky. But they didn't move. They sat like stone in shadow, not resisting, not chasing, just staying. When the last applause faded, a few teachers passed by. Some smiled tight and hurried away. One leaned in close just for a moment. "Thank you," she whispered. "For more than just today." Clara nodded once. No need for more. The crowd began to shift and scatter toward camera flashes, flower bouquets, and overpriced restaurant reservations. But those who lingered, those who stayed a little longer, they saw something else. The 6 men approached slowly, no longer in formation, just as themselves. Each one stopped in front of Luke, shook his hand, offered him a quiet word, a steady look. But when they reached Clara, they didn't extend hands. They saluted, one by one. Silent, unforced, unmistakable. Not for show, not for anyone else, just for her. She didn't return the gesture, didn't need to, but she looked at each of them, met every eye, and they held her gaze like men who remembered exactly what had been done for them, not in war but in the quiet between battles. One spoke first, his voice soft, respectful. "Ma'am, there are things that don't fit into medals, but they shaped us all the same." Another added, "Half of what we know we learned from books. The other half we learned from watching how you carry weight." Clara said only one thing, "I didn't do anything you wouldn't have done, I just didn't let anyone tell me I couldn't." Hartley, the sniper with the steel in his spine, stepped forward last, placed something in her palm, a patch, the same green canvas as before. But now, below the word "Guide," another line had been added in gold thread, "Honorary Command." Clara stared at it for a long while, ran her thumb along the stitching, then folded it once gently and placed it in her pocket. She never needed a title to lead, but this was for the scars she never showed, and for once her silence wasn't mistaken for absence. It was understood as strength. They left quietly, the 6 of them, melted into the crowd like they'd never been there, but everyone knew now they had, and nothing would quite be the same again. A week later, a photo surfaced. Luke at the podium, Clara in the background, the 6 men standing behind her, silent, still unmistakable. The article didn't mention Clara by name in the headline, but the body of the story did. The woman in the jacket. It was enough. Emails started trickling in to the school board, then calls, then printed out copies of Luke's speech pinned to teacher breakroom corkboards. One laminated version found its way to the school library, slipped beneath a portrait of the school's founders. It stayed there. No one removed it. No one dared. Principal Meredith announced his retirement by end of summer. Personal goals, he said. No one asked what they were. Mrs. Bellamy quietly stepped down from the Parent Advisory Board. No press release. But her absence was noticed, and in their place, something else settled in. Not resentment, not outrage, but reevaluation. At the first PTA meeting of the new year, someone suggested a new award. A recognition not for grades or donations, but for service that goes unseen. They named it the Dawson Award. It passed unanimously. Clara never attended those meetings. She didn't need to. She had already done her part. Back in her garage, the routine returned. Oil pans, bent wrenches. The hum of an old fan spinning slow against the heat. A boy from down the street, barely old enough to drive, started coming by. Junked sedan, hope in his eyes. She didn't lecture, just handed him gloves and said, "Start by listening to the engine. It tells you what it needs." One afternoon, after a long silence, the boy said, "You're teaching me how to survive." Clara looked up from the engine bay, wiped her hands on a faded towel, and handed him a socket wrench. "No, I'm teaching you how to not ask permission, because no one had ever given her permission. She'd had to become her own permission." The patch with golden thread stayed in her top drawer, not because it wasn't precious, but because it didn't need to be seen to be real, like her. The summer faded, the lawn browned, the banners came down, but one thing remained: a single chair, front row, padded plain and always left empty. No plaque, no sign, just there. Some years no one mentioned it. Other years a student would ask, "Who's that for?" and a teacher would smile and answer softly for someone who never needed an invitation to belong. Luke never gave another graduation speech. When the school board asked him to return the following year, he declined. "Let someone else speak," this time he said. "My mom's part is done. It's time for someone else to rise." But he did start writing. Just a blog. Short entries. Reflections on service, on silence, on what it means to grow up watching someone shape entire lives without ever stepping into the light. It didn't go viral, but it spread. A teacher in Ohio printed out an entry and left it taped beside the faculty coffee machine. A woman in Texas wrote, "This reminded me of my mother. She wasn't weak, just quiet." Another wrote, "I was the kid in the back row. Thank you for showing what it means to rise with grace." And then a quiet evening, the end of a long day. Clara and Luke stood outside the garage. The sun dipped low behind the tree line, leaving streaks of gold across the hood of an old truck. The world had returned to its rhythm, but they hadn't. Not quite. Something had shifted. Luke turned to her and asked, "Do you think people really change?" She didn't answer right away, just rubbed engine oil from her palms with an old towel, then looked toward the horizon where the day was giving itself back to the night. "Some don't," she said. "But the ones who matter, yeah. They do." A breeze stirred. The porch light hummed to life, and from inside the house the old jacket, patched worn and quiet, swayed gently from its hook by the door. And sometimes all it takes is one woman, in old boots, standing still long enough for the world to finally see her. Clara never asked to be remembered, but memory real. Memory, the kind built from quiet impact, has a way of refusing to fade. If this story made you think of someone, a mother, a mentor, a quiet soul who gave more than they ever asked back, don't wait, tell them, honor them. Share this story with someone who needs to remember. You don't need to speak loudly to make a lasting sound, and for every Clara out there still sitting in the back row, still steady, still unseen, we see you now, and we remember.